Hey there, Seahawks. It's Miss Adams, and in this video, we're going to learn about assessing a regression model and a curved relationship. All right, so a residual plot is a scatter plot that plots the residuals on the vertical axis and the explanatory variable on the horizontal axis. All right, so if you do a linear regression in your calculator, on your TI-84, you can make a scatter plot. You go to second, y equals, which is stat plots. You change the scatter type to the scatter plot, and you change your y-list to resid. So to get to resid, you have to hit second stat, which is list, and then go down and you'll see it in the list, resid. Interpreting residual plot. To determine whether the regression model is appropriate, you want to look at the residual plot. If there is no leftover curved pattern in the residual plot, the regression model is appropriate. If there is a leftover curved pattern in the residual plot, the regression model is not appropriate. The standard deviation of the residual measures the size of a typical residual. That is, S measures the typical distance between the actual y values and the predicted y values. The coefficient of determination, R squared, measures the percent of the variability in the response variable that is accounted for by the least squares regression line. All right, interpreting a residual plot. So a scatter plot A and a residual plot B for the relationship between price and miles driven for Ford F-150s, use the residual plot to determine whether a least squares regression model is appropriate. So you can see the scatter plot. We have a line of best fit going through it. It looks like the scatter plot has like a linear pattern. And when I look at the residual plot, I see that the residuals are scattered. There's no curve going on in that. I have some positive residuals, some negative residuals. So the least squares regression line is appropriate because the residuals are randomly scattered with no curve. All right, interpreting a residual plot with this one, is it possible to predict the mass of the Atlantic Ocean rockfish from its length? A sample of rockfish was obtained, and the least squares regression equation for predicting the mass of the fish in grams from the length in centimeters was calculated. The residual plot from that model is shown below. Use the residual plot to determine whether the least squares regression model is appropriate. All right, so when I look at this residual plot, I see a very clear pattern. So because there is a clear leftover pattern in the residual plot, the least squares regression line is not an appropriate model. All right, interpreting S and R squared. In lesson 3.5, we use the least squares regression line to model the relationship between the height of a student in inches and their vertical jump. The standard deviation of the residuals for this model is S equals 4.45 inches. Interpret this value. All right, so the actual vertical jump of the student is typically about 4.45 inches away from the vertical jump predicted by the least squares regression line. Interpret the value of R squared equals 0.29 for this model. So 29% of the variability in vertical jump is accounted for by the least squares regression line with X equaling height. So these are kind of just stock sentences that you have to put the context in and the numbers in for. You want to be able to pick these from multiple choice options. An exponential model, a model in the form y hat equals a times b to the x, where b is greater than 0. If b is greater than the 1, the graph will show exponential growth. If b is between 0 and 1, the graph will show exponential decay. All right, working with exponential models, a random sample of 14 golfers was selected from the 147 players in the Ladies Professional Golf Association tour in a recent year. The total amount of money won during the year in dollars and the average number of strokes above 70 for each player in the sample were recorded. Lower scoring averages are better in golf. Below is a sketch of the scatter plot along with an exponential model. So this one's not trying to follow a linear model, it's following an exponential model. You can see a curve in that pattern. Calculate an exponential model for these data using the adjusted scoring averages as the explanatory variable. Use technology. So we're going to use Statplet.com. You're going to go to two quantitative variables, and you're going to calculate. You're going to click calculate exponential regression. And we get y hat equals 1,000 1,479,696 times 0.405 to the x power. All right, so it's an exponential function. All right, calculate and interpret the residual for Lorena Ochoa, the last golfer in the list. So this one here, I want to plug 16.16 in for x. All right, so I'm going to plug that into my calculator, and I get $1,280,458. I want the residual, so it's actual. Her actual earnings was $1,626,297 minus the predicted that I just calculated, gives me $345,839. The earnings for Lorena Ochoa were $345,839, greater than expected. All right, go Seahawks.